Hey guys, tonight we're going to indulge in a little fantasy. Let's imagine you've made it. You are rich, you are powerful, you are important, but you're not a modern billionaire with a super yacht. You're a medieval lord or lady, master of a great stone castle, draped in velvet and furs. We're going to explore what it was really like to be wealthy in the Middle Ages. And I promise you, it's not the fairy tale you might imagine. Forget the romantic images of grand feasts and noble knights. Instead, picture a life that is cold, public, intensely uncomfortable, and fraught with dangers that money cannot protect you from. This isn't a story about the perks of power. It's about the profound, soul-crushing downside. You probably wouldn't survive a week before trading your velvet robes for a quiet, warm, and distinctly not being plotted against peasants' hovel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to see where you're listening from, so drop your city or country and the local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken not to the soft beep of an alarm clock, but to the feeling of a profound, penetrating cold that seems to emanate from the very stones of your castle. You are lying in a magnificent, enormous four-poster bed, swaddled in what should be a cocoon of comfort. But the first sensation of your rich, powerful day is an unshakable chill. The air in your bedchamber is so cold, you can see your own breath misting in the dim grey light. This is the first and most constant truth of your privileged existence. You are the master of a gilded cage, and that cage is a freezing cold castle. Your morning begins not with a gentle personal routine, but with the arrival of your servant. Two of them enter, their footsteps echoing in the vast chamber, and pull back the heavy velvet curtains of your great bed. This act, meant to protect you from drafts during the night, now exposes you to the full, frigid reality of your room. Your morning begins not with a gentle alarm, but with a servant opening your heavy curtains, letting in the grey light and a gust of wind that reminds you that you live in a glorified refrigerator. Another servant kneels at the massive stone fireplace, struggling to coax the embers from last night back into a roaring blaze. Your state-of-the-art heating system is a fireplace large enough to roast a whole ox, which successfully heats a 5-foot radius around it, leaving the other 900 square feet of your room at Arctic cave temperature. You look around your chamber. It is a testament to your wealth and status. The stone walls are covered with enormous, expensive tapestries depicting scenes from the Bible or a glorious hunt, but these are not just for decoration. As a mainstream historical fact, these tapestries are a vital layer of insulation, a desperate attempt to keep the damp and cold of the stone from seeping into the room. The windows are tall and narrow slits, really, a reminder that your home is a fortress first and a residence second. They might have some small panes of glass, a sign of immense wealth, but they are ill-fitting and drafty, letting in constant, whining drafts. You swing your legs out of bed, your bare feet landing not on a soft carpet, but on a floor of cold, unforgiving stone, possibly covered with a quirky but questionable form of medieval insulation: rushes. For centuries, it was common practice to cover stone floors with a thick layer of cut rushes or straw. This was meant to keep the cold at bay and absorb spills, discarded food, and other waste. But these rushes were rarely chained. Over time, they would become a compressed, filthy mat of rotting vegetation, animal droppings from the dogs that roamed freely, fleas, and whatever else got ground into them. The castle has a rustic, old-world charm, which is a polite way of saying it's drafty, damp, and smells faintly of regret and mildew. Your life is a constant, quiet battle against the cold. You wear furs and heavy robes indoors, not just as a fashion statement, but out of sheer necessity. You conduct your daily business huddled as close to the fireplace as your dignity will allow. Did the medieval nobility, born and raised in these conditions, even notice the cold in the same way we would? Historians still argue whether they were so accustomed to this level of physical discomfort that they barely perceived it, or if their lavish displays of furs, tapestries, and roaring fires were a constant desperate, and often losing battle against their freezing surroundings. Standing there, shivering in your fine linen nightshirt as your servants help you prepare for the day, you are surrounded by evidence of your immense wealth. The carved oak of your bed, the rich dyes of the tapestries, the silver pitcher and basin your servants bring for you to wash. Yet you are fundamentally uncomfortable. You are cold. You are drafty. And you are living in a space designed for siege warfare, not for cozy domesticity. You are learning the first hard lesson about being rich in the Middle Ages. Your wealth can buy you power, status, and influence, but it cannot buy you simple, creaturely comfort. Your home is not a sanctuary, it is a stage, and the performance of being powerful is a very cold business indeed. As you stand shivering by the struggling fire, the servants who entered your room at dawn are now upon you. One holds a silver basin of cold water, another a linen towel. They are here to help you perform your morning ablutions and to get you dressed. Your morning skincare routine is performed in front of an audience of 6 people, one of whom is holding your chamber pot. It's great for building confidence. This is your first and most intimate reminder of the day's central theme. You are rich, you are powerful, but you are never, ever truly alone. Privacy is the one luxury you simply cannot buy. The modern concept of personal space is completely alien to your medieval world. Your life is not lived in a series of private, quiet moments. It is a continuous public performance from the moment you wake until the moment you fall asleep. The servants who dress you will not leave when they are done. Your chaplain might arrive to discuss the day's prayers while you are still fastening your breeches. Your steward might need a decision on the price of hay before you've even had a sip of morning ale. You wish you could just be alone with your thoughts. Unfortunately, your thoughts have to take a number and wait in line behind your chaplain, your steward, and your dog. This lack of privacy extends out of the bedchamber and into every moment of your day. You do not eat a quiet family breakfast in a cozy kitchen. You take your meat in the great hall, a vast echoing chamber filled with your entire household, your family, your household knights, visiting guests, high-ranking servants, and a swarm of petitioners and hangers-on. Every bite you take is observed, every conversation is public knowledge. You try to have a private, hushed conversation with your wife, but it's difficult with the 3 servants, a visiting priest, and a man whose only job is to hold your favorite hawk all standing right there. As a mainstream historical fact, the medieval noble court functioned with very little separation between the public and private spheres. The lord's life was the life of the household, and his daily routines were public rituals that affirmed his status and power. Even your bedchamber, the room you just left, is not a true sanctuary. Later in the day, you might receive your most trusted advisors or an important messenger in that very room, conducting sensitive business while sitting on the edge of the same great bed where you sleep. This constant, oppressive presence of other people creates a hotbed of intrigue. You are always being watched. The servant pouring your wine might be a spy for a rival lord. The 2 knights whispering in the corner might be plotting to shift their allegiance. The priest offering you spiritual counsel might be reporting back to the bishop on your political leanings. The very walls have ears. In fact, the quirky origin of the term eavesdropper comes from the literal practice of someone standing under the eaves of a building just outside a window to listen in on the conversations within. You find yourself constantly lowering your voice, acutely aware that any tapestry might conceal a pair of listening ears. Was this constant public presence a choice or a necessity? Historians still argue whether the perpetual audience in a noble's life was primarily a security measure designed to make secret plots and assassinations more difficult by eliminating solitude, or if it was a deliberate tool of power, allowing the lord to be a constant, visible symbol of authority, justice, and largesse to his entire household. In practice, it was likely both, but the psychological toll of being perpetually on display must have been immense. Perhaps the most extreme example of this utter lack of privacy was the position, in a royal court, of the groom of the stool. This was a high-ranking and incredibly trusted courtier whose official duty was to attend the king during his most private moments of excretion. The groom of the stool was responsible for monitoring the king's bowel movements, a key indicator of health and humoral medicine, providing water and towels, and generally assisting with the whole unpleasant business. Because of this unparalleled intimate access, the groom of the stool often became one of the king's closest confidants and one of the most powerful people at court. Your own household might not be a royal one, but the principle remains. Your most basic private bodily functions are attended to by others. At the end of a long, exhausting day of performing your power, you finally retire to your bedchamber. But it is not empty. Your personal servants are there, ready to help you undress. Your chaplain might be waiting to lead you in your evening prayers. A guard may be posted inside your room for security. The dream of simply closing a door and being completely, utterly alone is the one fantasy your wealth cannot fulfill. You are the center of your world, but you are also a prisoner of it, perpetually watched, perpetually attended, and never, ever by yourself. Your day, having begun without privacy, continues with an immediate and overwhelming social obligation. You make your way from your bedchamber to the great hall to break your fast, and the sheer number of people is staggering. The long, heavy oak tables are already filling up with the members of your household, and the cavernous, smoky room hums with the noise of 100 conversations. This is not a peaceful morning meal. It is the beginning of another day of performing your most important and most draining duty. You are about to confront the crushing burden of endless hospitality, a world where your home is a public hall filled with freeloading guests. In the medieval world, for a person of your status, hospitality is not an occasional choice. It is a constant, non-negotiable requirement. Your power and prestige are not measured by the gold in your vaults, but by the number of people you can afford to feed, house, and entertain on a daily basis. A lord with an empty hall is a lord with no influence. Your castle, therefore, is less a private home and more a cross between a military barracks, a hotel, and a government building. Your castle has a permanent +100 on the guest list. You're not sure who half these people are, but they seem to be enjoying the free ale. Who are all these people? First, there is your core household or affinity. This includes your family, a contingent of household knights who serve as your personal guard, and a vast hierarchy of servants from your high-ranking steward and treasurer down to the lowliest scullery maid and stable boy. As a mainstream historical fact, the magnificent households of high-ranking nobles could be enormous, with a 15th century duke sometimes maintaining a household of 400 or 500 people. All of these individuals live in your castle and must be fed and paid from your coffers. Then there are the guests, a constantly revolving cast of characters. Any traveller of noble birth passing through your lands would expect to be offered shelter and sustenance as a right of their class. To refuse would be a grave insult. This means that on any given night, a neighbouring baron, a travelling knight, or even your own overlord or the king himself could arrive at your gates with their entire entourage and expect to be put up for days or even weeks. This is not a polite request. It is a demand, and the cost of feeding and housing a visiting lord's 50 retainers falls entirely on you. But it doesn't stop there. You are also expected to offer hospitality to a host of other travellers. Monks, friars, pilgrims on their way to a holy shrine, travelling minstrels and merchants would all seek shelter at your castle gates. Your Christian duty and your reputation for generosity demand that you provide for them. This brings us to the quirky but important role of the almoner. This was an officer of your household whose specific job was to manage your charitable giving. Every day the almoner would distribute leftover food from your tables, the alms, to a crowd of the local poor who gathered at your gates. Your castle is a beacon of charity, which also means it's a daily magnet for every beggar for miles around. The financial strain of this constant performance of largesse is immense. The logistics are a nightmare. Your kitchens run from before dawn until late at night, roasting entire animals on spits, baking hundreds of loaves of bread, and brewing literal rivers of ale. You spend more on wine for guests you don't like in a single week than a peasant family earns in a decade. It's the medieval equivalent of being house poor. Your estate's farms, mills, and forests are all geared towards one primary purpose: producing enough food and resources to keep this massive, hungry machine of a household running. The goal is to show everyone how powerful you are by feeding them until you go bankrupt. It's a bold strategy. What was the real point of all this? Was it truly about generosity? Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for lavish medieval hospitality was a genuine social custom rooted in mutual obligation and a sense of Christian charity, or if it was a ruthless political tool. By hosting vast numbers of people, you displayed your immense wealth and power, you created a network of individuals who were dependent on your favor, and you could even strategically bankrupt a rival by staying with them for a month with your entire entourage in tow. You sit at the high table on its raised dais, looking out over the noisy, feasting chaos of your great hall. The dogs are under the tables, fighting over discarded bones. The minstrels are playing too loudly in the gallery. A knight is arguing with a squire. A visiting friar is drinking far too much of your best wine. This is your home. It is loud, it is expensive, it is utterly devoid of peace, and it is a constant crushing weight on your resources and your spirit. This is the price of power. It is the relentless duty to be the host of a party that never, ever ends. The endless cycle of feasts, the rivers of rich wine, and the stress of managing your chaotic household eventually begin to take their toll. One morning, you wake with a searing, stabbing pain in your big toe, which is red, swollen, and exquisitely tender to the slightest touch. You have developed gout, the so-called disease of kings. This mainstream historical fact was a common affliction of the wealthy, a direct result of a diet heavy in meat, rich sauces, and alcohol. Your very wealth has made you sick, and now you must subject yourself to the terrifying world of medieval medicine, where you will learn that while your treatment will be more expensive than a peasant's, it will be no more effective. You get the same terrible medical care, but with a great deal more ceremony. You do not summon the local village herbalist or midwife. Your status demands a university-trained physician. He arrives with an air of immense self-importance, dressed in sober but expensive robes, perhaps with an assistant in tow. He smells faintly of books and arrogance. He does not offer a reassuring smile. The physician's bedside manner is excellent, combining the warmth of a tax collector with the breezy optimism of a gravedigger. He listens to your complaint with a dismissive air, as if your agonizing pain is a rather tedious interruption to his important scholarly thoughts. The examination begins. He might feel your pulse, but his primary diagnostic tool is uroscopized detailed examination of your urine. A servant brings him a sample of your urine in a special glass flask called a Jordan. The physician holds the flask up to the light, studying its color, clarity, and sediment with the intense focus of a jeweler examining a diamond. This is where his art truly shines. He might consult a quirky but common diagnostic tool, a uroscopy chart, often in the shape of a wheel, displaying 20 or more different colors of urine, each linked to a specific humoral imbalance or disease. After a long, solemn period of contemplation, he gravely informs you that your humors are insufficiently moist and excessively peevish. The treatment, he announces, involves a multi-part plan and a very large bill. His prescribed treatment is, in essence, the same one a village healer would recommend: bleeding and purging. But your wealth affords you a much more theatrical and costly version. For the bleeding, he will not use leeches, which is seen as a bit common. Instead, he will perform a phlebotomy. With great ceremony, he consults a chart showing the veins of the body and their connection to the various organs and zodiac sign. He determines that for your specific ailment, blood must be let from a particular vein in your ankle. He produces a fine, sharp steel lancet and makes a swift, precise incision, allowing your excessive and hot blood to drain into a silver bowl held by his assistant. The procedure is cloaked in Latin phrases and references to the ancient Greek physician Galen, all of which serves to justify its exorbitant cost. Next comes the purging. You are not given a simple herbal laxative. You are prescribed a complex, foul-tasting concoction known as an electri, made from dozens of ingredients, including rare and expensive spices from the East, powdered gemstones, and powerful imported purgative herbs. The physician explains that this will violently cleanse your body of the corrupted humors that are causing your gout. It does indeed make you violently ill, leaving you weak, dehydrated, and miserable for a full day. Why would you, a powerful and intelligent person, submit to this. Historians still argue whether university-trained physicians were sought by the elite for their actual medical efficacy, which was statistically no better than that of folk healers if their primary role was as a status symbol. Hiring an expensive Latin-spouting doctor reassured the wealthy patient and their family that they were receiving the very best care available. The complex, often painful treatments were a form of theatre, a visible sign that something serious was being done, regardless of the actual outcome. As you lie in your magnificent bed, your foot throbbing, your body weak from the bleeding and purging, you reflect on your situation. You have paid a small fortune to be ritually poisoned and drained of blood. A peasant in the village with a fever gets much the same result from a handful of leeches and a draught of bad ale. It's the illusion of choice. Your wealth has not bought you better health or a more effective cure. It has simply purchased a more elaborate, more ceremonial, and infinitely more expensive version of the same fundamental medical ignorance that afflicts every level of society. Sickness, you realize, is the great leveler, and your money has only made your experience of it more complicated. After a few days of prescribed rest, your gout-ridden foot feels marginally better, and the lingering weakness from the physician's enthusiastic purging has begun to fade. It is time to get out of your great lonely bed and resume your public life. This, however, requires getting dressed, and you're about to discover that another of the worst things about being rich is the sheer physical agony of your own fashionable clothes. Your opulent wardrobe is a performance, and it is incredibly heavy, restrictive, and profoundly uncomfortable. The process of getting dressed is a formal, multi-stage ritual performed with the help of at least 2 servants. You don't just throw on a tunic. You are carefully assembled, layer by agonizing layer. It begins with a simple, fine linen chemise and braise, or breeches. This is the last comfortable moment you will have until you undress again at night. Over this goes a doublet or cotehardie, a tailored garment that is tight-fitting across the torso. And over that comes the main event, the magnificent outer garment, perhaps a flowing, voluminous robe called a opulent. This garment is your primary billboard of wealth. It is crafted from yards and yards of incredibly expensive fabric, like deep indigo velvet that seems to drink the light, or heavy, ornate brocade woven with shimmering metallic thread. To display your status, you must use an excessive amount of this fabric, so the robe trails on the floor and the sleeves are a spectacle in themselves. Your sleeves are so long they occasionally dip into your soup, which adds a certain je ne sais quoi to the fabric's aroma. They might be dagged, with the edges cut into fanciful shapes, or so voluminous they hang almost to your knees. And then there is the fur. The entire robe is lined with it, a thick, dense layer of fur, for warmth, remember the freezing castle, and more importantly, for status. While a merchant might wear fox or squirrel, your rank demands something far more luxurious, like the dark, glossy fur of sable or the pure, white, black-spotted winter coat of ermine. In fact, as a mainstream historical fact, many regions had strict sumptuary laws that legally regulated who could wear what. These laws might dictate that only a duke or a king could wear ermine, making your choice of fur lining not just a matter of taste, but a legally protected statement of your place in the social hierarchy. All of this fabric and fur adds up to an astonishing amount of weight. When the servants finally settle the heavy robe onto your shoulders, you feel the physical burden of your own status. You finally stand up, wearing enough layered velvet and fur to insulate a small barn. Your personal fashion statement is glamorous beast of burden. Simply walking across the room is an effort, a slow, dignified glide that is less a choice and more a necessity due to the sheer weight and restrictive tailoring of your clothes. The discomfort doesn't end there. On your feet, you don't wear sensible leather boots. The height of fashion demands long, pointed shoes known as poulaines or krakauers. The points of these shoes can be so absurdly long that they extend 6 inches or more beyond your actual toes. This quirky and impractical fashion reached such extremes that some dandies wore shoes with points so long they had to be stuffed with moss or whalebone to keep their shape, and sometimes were even attached to a garter below the knee with a fine chain to prevent the wearer from tripping over their own feet. Your shoes are so long and pointy you could spear a fish from 3 feet away. Walking, however, is a significant challenge. It's fashion over function. Every piece of your attire is designed to communicate one thing: that you are so wealthy and important you do not need to perform any kind of useful physical labor. Your long sleeves would get caught in a plow, your tight doublet would prevent you from lifting a heavy object, and your pointed shoes would make it impossible to run. Your clothing is a form of conspicuous consumption, a deliberate theatrical display of impracticality. But how did it feel to be trapped inside this velvet prison every day? Historians still argue whether the restrictive and cumbersome fashions of the late medieval nobility were a source of pride and a comfortable, accepted expression of their identity, or if they were privately felt as an oppressive physical burden that they were forced to endure for the sake of maintaining their public status. As you stand there fully attired, you feel magnificent, powerful, and ridiculous. You are a walking tapestry, a testament to your family's wealth and influence. You are also sweating under layers of fur. Your movement is restricted. You can barely feel your own feet, and the weight of it all is exhausting. You are ready to hold court in the Great Hall, to impress your guests and intimidate your rivals, but you are also profoundly physically miserable. Your wealth has bought you a beautiful, agonizing cage of your own making. Dressed in your magnificent velvet and fur prison, you make your way to the high table in the Great Hall. It is time for the main meal of the day, a feast designed not merely to satiate hunger, but to project your power and wealth to the 100 or so people crammed into the hall. As servants begin to haul in platter after platter of food, you are confronted with another of the great, unpleasant ironies of your position. Your lavish feasts, the very symbol of your status, are a minefield of long-term health problems and immediate paranoid fear. The sheer quantity and richness of the food is staggering. While the peasants outside your walls subsist on bread, pottage, and whatever vegetables they can grow, your table groans under the weight of meat. You are served roasted venison, wild boar, swan, and even peacock, the latter often redressed in its own iridescent feathers after cooking for a more spectacular presentation. The fish course might include salmon, pike, and eels, all swimming in thick, creamy sauces. Your diet is 90% meat and 10% spices that cost more than the meat. Vegetables are for the peasants and people who enjoy not having gout. Every dish is aggressively seasoned. As a mainstream historical fact, spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were astronomically expensive, imported over vast distances from the East. A wealthy household would use them extravagantly, not just for flavor, but to broadcast their immense wealth. The air in the hall is thick with the scent of roasting meat and exotic, costly spices. Between the main courses, your cooks might present subtleties or entremets. This quirky and spectacular tidbit of medieval dining involved creating elaborate, often inedible, sculptures from marzipan or sugar paste, perhaps a miniature castle, a mythological beast, or a political allegory designed solely to dazzle your guests. This diet, while impressive, is a slow-motion assault on your body. The relentless consumption of red meat and rich purplish wine is the direct cause of your agonizing gout. The lack of fiber leads to chronic digestive ailment, and the sugar, another incredible luxury used liberally in both savory and sweet dishes, leads to rampant tooth decay, a source of constant nagging pain for which there is no cure beyond a brutal extraction by a barber surgeon. But while gout might kill you slowly, there is a much more immediate threat lurking on your plate: poison. For a person of your power and influence, with rivals in every neighboring castle and potential traitors within your own, the fear of being poisoned is a constant, gnawing anxiety. Every beautiful dish, every cup of wine, is a potential vehicle for your own demise. Historians still argue whether the constant fear of poisoning among the medieval elite was a justified response to a common political tool or a form of collective paranoia, with actual instances of successful poisoning being far rarer than the pervasive anxiety would suggest. To you, however, the threat feels very real. To combat this, your meal is preceded by a series of protective rituals. Before a dish is placed before you, a servant known as an assayer or food taster must take a portion. Your food taster, a nervous young man named Thomas, takes a bite of the roast peacock. You wait a respectable minute to see if he starts convulsing. If not, bon appétit. It is a high-stress, high-risk job, but one that is absolutely essential for your peace of mind. You also employ more esoteric, magical protections. Beside your cup, you might have a piece of what is claimed to be a unicorn's horn, most likely a piece of a narwhal's tusk bought from a trader at immense cost. Before you drink your wine, you dip the tip of the horn into the cup. It is believed that a true unicorn's horn will sweat or change color in the presence of poison, which is the whole point. These rituals, the taster, the unicorn hornaire, all part of the theatre. They are meant to reassure you, to reassure your guests, and to warn any potential poisoner that you are vigilant, but deep down, a cold knot of fear remains. What if the taster was bribed? What if the poison is slow acting, designed to mimic a natural illness days later? What if the unicorn horn is just a worthless piece of bone from a sea creature sold to you by a clever charlatan? The paranoia is a constant bitter sauce that flavors every single dish. You finally signal that you are ready to eat. You pick up your personal ornate knife forks, are not yet common for dining at. Carve a piece from the peacock that has been declared safe. The meat is rich, tender, and heady with the taste of cloves and pepper. The wine in your silver goblet is sweet and strong. It is the food of kings, a culinary experience beyond the wildest dreams of the common man. Yet, as you chew, you cannot fully enjoy it. Each bite is a strange calculation. This delicious spiced meat is surely contributing to the fiery pain in your joints. This sweet wine is rotting your teeth from your gums, and somewhere in the back of your mind, the thought always lingers. Is this the one? Is this the bite that carries the tasteless powder? Is this the sip that will send you into convulsions before the end of the meal? You look out over your great hall at the sea of feasting, drinking, loud, and oblivious people. They see a powerful lord enjoying the fruits of his wealth. They see a man at the pinnacle of society, partaking in a feast worthy of his station. They do not see the gnawing anxiety, the chronic physical pain, or the quiet, lonely terror that accompanies every single meal. They do not understand that this magnificent feast, this ultimate display of your success, is also one of the worst things about being you. It is a beautiful, delicious, slow-acting poison, one way or another. The feast finally ends, and the great hall slowly empties, leaving behind a mess of bones, spilled wine, and sleeping dogs. But as you retire from the hall, the anxiety from the meal does not recede. The fear of poison was just one symptom of a much larger and more dangerous sickness that infects your entire existence. This is the deadly game of political intrigue. Your land, your title, your very life are all prizes in a relentless contest, and your wealth and influence don't protect you. They just make you a more tempting target for rivals. In the feudal world, power is a fragile and finite commodity. For another man to rise, you often have to fall. Your sprawling, fertile lands are coveted by the neighboring baron whose own territory is rocky and poor. Your trading rights are envied by a rival merchant guild in the city. Your influence at the king's court is a direct threat to other ambitious nobles seeking the monarch's favor. Even your own family can be your most dangerous enemy. A younger brother with no lands of his own might see you as little more than an obstacle to his own inheritance. Your best friend is the neighboring baron who has tried to have you declared a heretic 3 times. It keeps the relationship exciting. This deadly game is played on multiple fronts. It is a constant war fought with whispers, lies, and betrayal. Your rivals will employ spies within your own household, that servant who seems too attentive, that knight who seems too friendly to report on your doings. They will spread slanderous rumors about you at the royal court, whispering accusations of treason, heresy, or incompetence into the king's ear, hoping to erode his trust in you. A pleasant afternoon at the king's court involves smiling graciously while trying to figure out which of the other nobles is currently plotting to have your head removed. The law, which should be your protection, is often just another weapon to be used against you. A rival might unearth an obscure century-old claim to a piece of your land and challenge you in the king's court, initiating a ruinously expensive and politically fraught legal battle that could drag on for years. Every document you sign, every charter you issue, must be carefully worded and flawlessly executed, lest a loophole be found and exploited. The quirky but critical importance of your personal sealthy unique design on your signet ring, used to authenticate documents with wax, becomes a source of constant anxiety. If your ring were ever stolen, a rival could use it to forge letters in your name, sending false orders to your men, relinquishing your rights to land, or even confessing to treason. This constant state of intrigue means you can never truly trust anyone. You trust your steward completely, which is why you have another servant spying on him and a third servant spying on the second servant. It's all about checks and balances. The loyalty of your own knights and retainers is a subject of constant calculation. Is their allegiance truly to you, or to the lands and titles you provide them? Would they stand with you if a more powerful lord offered them a better deal? Historians still argue whether feudal loyalty was a deeply held personal bond of honor between a lord and his vassal, or a pragmatic, constantly shifting alliance based purely on self-interest and the acquisition of power and land. From your precarious position, it feels very much like the latter. The history of your era is littered with the corpses of powerful men who played this game and lost. As a mainstream historical fact, the Wars of the Roses in 15th century England provides a terrifying example of how unstable a nobleman's life could be. Great lords who were the king's closest friends one year could be arrested, stripped of their lands, and beheaded for treason the next, all due to a shift in the political winds or the machinations of a rival faction. High status didn't mean security. It just meant you had further to fall, and the fall was almost always fatal. Your life becomes one of ceaseless vigilance. You must maintain your own network of spies and informants. You must carefully manage your reputation, performing your duties with flawless propriety. You must navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, balancing allegiance to the king with the need to maintain your own power base. It is mentally and emotionally exhausting. Unlike the peasant who worries about his crops, your worries are existential. He fears a bad harvest. You fear a quiet knock on the door in the middle of the night. A summons from a king who has been convinced you are a traitor. This constant grinding pressure is one of the worst things about being you. The cold castle, the lack of privacy, the uncomfortable clothes, these are mere annoyances compared to the soul-crushing paranoia of knowing you are a perpetual target. Your wealth has not bought you peace of mind. It has bought you a starring role in a dangerous, high-stakes game you are forced to play every single day, and for which the ultimate price of losing is everything. In the midst of the constant swirling game of political intrigue, your father summons you to his solar. You find him staring at a map, a deep frown etched on his face. He informs you that your family's long-standing, bitter dispute with the neighboring baron, the one who wants your riverlands, and has twice accused you of heresy, is to be ended, and it will be ended in the traditional way, with a wedding. Your wedding. You are to be married to the baron's daughter, a girl you have never met. This is another of the worst things about being rich and powerful. Your marriage is not a matter of the heart. It is a business merger, and you are the primary asset being traded. The modern notion of romantic love as the foundation for marriage is completely absent from your world. For the nobility, marriage is arguably the most important political and economic tool a family possesses. It is how alliances are forged, feuds are ended, land is consolidated, and most critically, how the family line is secured for the next generation. As a mainstream historical fact, arranged marriages, often contracted when the bride and groom were still children, were the absolute norm for the European aristocracy. You don't choose a spouse based on affection or compatibility. You are assigned a spouse based on their strategic value. The marriage negotiations are very romantic, involving lengthy discussions about dowry lands, military obligations, and whose second cousin gets a sinecure at court. You were likely betrothed years ago, in a complex contract hammered out between your father and the baron. Now that you are of age, it is time to fulfill the terms of that contract. A meeting is arranged. The primary, overriding purpose of this union is the production of an heir, preferably a male one. This pressure is immense and falls most heavily on your new wife. Her value, in the cold calculus of dynastic politics, is almost entirely tied to her womb. If she fails to produce a son to inherit your titles and lands, the marriage could be considered a failure. In some cases, a husband could even seek an annulment from the church on the grounds of non-consummation or some other technicality, freeing him to try again with a new, hopefully more fertile bride. Is it possible for love to grow in such a cold, transactional environment? Historians still argue whether these arranged political marriages were truly the loveless, pragmatic arrangements they appear to be, or if genuine affection and a deep companionate bond, born of shared duty and mutual respect, could and often did develop over time between spouses who shared the immense pressures of their class. You look at this nervous stranger across the room and can only hope for a partnership based on tolerance, not a lifetime of quiet misery. The wedding itself is not an intimate celebration of your love. It is a massive, week-long public spectacle designed to display the combined power and wealth of your two families. Hundreds of guests arrive, another crushing burden of hospitality. Remember that? The feasting is even more lavish than usual, the wine flows even more freely, and the entertainment is on a grand scale. The ceremony in the church is a solemn public declaration of a political and economic union. The day culminates in the bedding ceremony. After the feast, a boisterous, drunken procession of guests, including your parents and closest friends, escorts you and your new bride to the bedchamber. They make bawdy jokes, offer crude advice, and finally tuck you into the great bed together before retreating, leaving you alone with a complete stranger who is now your wife. Your wedding night is a private, intimate moment between you, your spouse, and 50 of your closest friends and relatives escorting you to the bedroom. It's very cozy. The consummation of the marriage is not just a private act, it is a political duty, the official sealing of the contract, a fact that will be discreetly inquired about by your respective families in the morning. Lying in the dark next to this person you barely know, you feel the full weight of your gilded cage. Every aspect of your life, where you live, what you wear, what you eat, and now who you will spend the rest of your life with, is dictated not by your own desires, but by the cold, hard requirements of your rank and station. Your heart is not your own. It is just another piece of property to be traded for a strategic advantage. The celebrations for your politically strategic wedding have barely concluded when a rider bearing the sigil of the king arrives at your castle gates. He carries a royal summons sealed with the king's own wax. You receive a letter from the king. It's not an invitation to a garden party. It's a mandatory RSVP to a potentially lethal group activity in a muddy field in France. The king is going to war, and as his loyal vassal, you are legally obligated to join him. This is one of the most terrifying downsides of your high station. Your life and fortune are not entirely your own, and you are required by law and honor to risk both in battle. This is the core of the feudal system, the contract that underpins your entire existence. As a mainstream historical fact, when your ancestors were granted these lands and titles by the king, it was not a gift, it was a transaction. In exchange for the fief, the land you owe the king your fealty, and, most importantly, military service. The summons will be specific. You are to present yourself at a certain muster point on a certain date with a prescribed number of knights, men at arms and archers, all fully equipped and ready for a campaign, typically for at least 40 days. To refuse this summons is to commit treason, an act punishable by the confiscation of your lands, the loss of your titles, and quite possibly your own execution. The first casualty of this summons is your treasury. War is astronomically expensive, and you are expected to bear the cost. You must provide your own suit of plate armor, a masterpiece of articulated steel that costs as much as a small farm. You need a powerful, trained warhorse, a destrier, which is worth more than all the peasant hovels in your village combined. And then you have to pay for the men you are required to bring. You must pay their wages, provide their weapons and armor, and feed them throughout the campaign. A long war, even a successful one, could financially ruin your family for a generation. After weeks of frantic preparation, you are finally ready. Your squires spend an hour encasing you in your armor, piece by heavy piece. When they finally lower the helmet's visor into place, your world becomes a cramped, stuffy metal box. Your vision is reduced to 2 narrow slits. Your hearing is muffled, and the sound of your own breathing is a loud, ragged roar in your ears. Your custom-fitted plate armor looks magnificent and makes you nearly invulnerable, except to heat stroke, drowning, and being unable to get up if you fall over. You ride out at the head of your small contingent, a glorious and powerful sight. But the glamour quickly fades. The campaign might not even involve a glorious pitched battle. You might be ordered to conduct a chevauchée, a quirky but brutal military tactic popular in the era. This involves riding through enemy territory not to conquer it, but simply to destroy it, burning villages, slaughtering livestock, and terrorizing the peasant population to undermine the enemy lord's economic base. It is a nasty, cruel, and deeply unchivalrous form of warfare, but eventually the day of the great battle arrives. You find yourself on a vast, muddy field, part of an enormous army, facing another army that looks just like yours. The romance of chivalry evaporates in the face of terrifying reality. Historians still argue whether the code of chivalry, with its elaborate ideals of honor, mercy, and noble conduct, had any significant impact on the brutal reality of medieval warfare, or if it was merely a literary and social veneer used by the knightly class to justify their violent profession and distinguish themselves from common soldiers. The battle begins. The noise is a deafening physical assaulter roar composed of thousands of shouting men, the blare of trumpets, the thunder of a cavalry charge, and the terrifying, high-pitched whistle of a sky-darkening cloud of arrows. The battle plan is simple. You charge at their pointy things, and they charge at your pointy things, and we see who is left standing. It's a classic, from inside your helmet, the world is a confusing, terrifying kaleidoscope of chaos. You couch your lance and charge, the ground shaking under the hooves of your warhorse. The clash of men and steel is a jarring, brutal shock. Your lance splinters on an enemy's shield. You draw your sword and begin to fight in the swirling, screaming melee. This is not a series of noble one-on-one duels. It is a desperate, hacking, grunting struggle for survival in a crush of bodies, where a man can be killed by a poleaxe from behind, trampled by a panicked horse, or dragged from his saddle and stabbed through a gap in his armor by a common foot soldier with a dagger. Your wealth makes you a prime target for capture. If you are unhorsed and surrounded, your enemies will try to take you alive, not out of mercy, but because a nobleman is worth a fortune in ransom, a sum that would further cripple your family's finances. As you fight for your life, your armor heavy and hot, your vision obscured, you realize the ultimate, terrible truth of your position. Your title, your land, your castle, they do not exist to give you a life of ease. They exist to fund and fuel the king's wars. You are not just a rich man. You are a military asset, a legal component of the kingdom's war machine, obligated to offer up your fortune and your body whenever you are called. You return from the war, battered but alive, your armor dented and your purse empty. You crave a long period of quiet rest, a reward for having fulfilled your violent duty to the king. What you get instead is a mountain of domestic chaos. The moment you ride through your own castle gates, you are swarmed by your steward, your treasurer, and a host of other officials, all clamoring for your attention. A tower needs urgent repairs. The harvest was poor in the north fields, the tenants are refusing to pay a new tax, and the cook is once again accusing the butcher of supplying him with questionable meat. You have survived the battlefield only to be thrown into a different kind of war, and you quickly discover that running a castle is a relentless logistical nightmare. The romantic image of lordship is one of feasts, hunts, and dispensing noble justice. The reality is that you are the CEO of a large, complex, and stunningly inefficient agricultural business. Your castle is not a home. It is a headquarters. Your life is a series of endless management meetings, personnel disputes, and budget crises. You have 100 servants, and you suspect at least half of them are actively working against your best interests. It's like managing a large, inefficient family of people you're not related to and who probably resent you. The sheer logistics of supplying your household are staggering. You have to feed several hundred people 3 times a day. Call back to the burden of hospitality. This means your steward must oversee your estate's farms, ensuring the crops are planted and harvested. He must manage the granary, the mill that grinds the flour, the bakery that bakes the bread, and the brewhouse that produces the ale. Any failure in this chain of drought, a blight, a fire in the millers, a crisis that lands squarely on your shoulders. The historical records of large medieval households, like the detailed English pipe rolls, show the incredible complexity of this manorial economy, with meticulous accounts tracking everything from the number of eggs collected to the cost of repairing a cartwheel. Then there is the financial management. Your treasurer presents you with the account books, and the news is rarely good. Your recent military campaign was ruinously expensive. The king might not have fully reimbursed you for your costs, and you are now deeply in debt. Meanwhile, collecting the rents and taxes from the peasants who live on your land is a constant struggle. They will hide livestock, underreport their harvests, and plead poverty to avoid paying their dues. Your treasurer informs you that you are rich in land, titles, and influence, but are somehow critically low on actual cash. It turns out influence is not accepted as payment by the wine merchant, and you are the human resources department. Your household is a complex hierarchy of specialized and often jealous officials. You have to mediate the quirky but fierce turf wars between your staff. The pantler, who is in charge of the pantry and bread, might accuse the butler, the man in charge of the buttery and the all-important barrels of wine and ale of stealing flour to brew his own side project beer. You must sit in judgment, listen to both sides, and render a verdict, knowing that whichever way you decide, one of them will be resentful for weeks. Indeed, you are the chief magistrate for everyone living under your authority. This morning you'll be presiding over a bitter dispute between two farmers over a stolen pig. Yesterday it was a knight who felt another knight looked at his hawk disrespectfully. You spend hours every week listening to petty squabbles, land disputes, and accusations of theft, your judgment serving as the only law most of these people will ever know. It is tedious, thankless work that feels far removed from the glory of lordship. Was this system even effective? Historians still argue whether the medieval manorial economy was an inherently inefficient and wasteful system that stifled innovation and barely produced enough to get by, or if it was a remarkably resilient and complex form of social and economic organization that was perfectly adapted to the technological and social realities of its time. All you know is that it is immensely stressful to be at the top of it. There is no escape. The problems of your household follow you everywhere. There are no off hours. You are woken in the night because a roof is leaking in the barracks. Your dinner is interrupted because a messenger has arrived with an urgent letter. Your attempt at a quiet moment of prayer is derailed by your wife, reminding you that your daughter's marriage negotiations have stalled. The mental load is immense and unrelenting. The powerful lord, master of all he surveys, is in reality a prisoner of his own estate, a man chained to an endless series of logistical, financial, and interpersonal problems. The stress is a far more potent and constant threat than any enemy on the battlefield. After weeks of drowning in account books and mediating disputes over stolen pigs, you declare that you need a break. You are a powerful lord after all, and you deserve some leisure time. But you are about to discover that fun in your world is just as rigid, prescribed, and often dangerous as your work. Your options for entertainment are few, and they mostly consist of finding new and exciting ways to get hurt while pretending you're having a wonderful time. Your leisure time is mostly just glorious, dangerous boredom. Your first and most common option is to go hunting. This is not a quiet, contemplative walk in the woods with a trusty dog. A noble hunt is a massive quasi-military operation. You ride out with a huge entourage of fellow nobles, squires, professional huntsmen, and servants whose only job is to handle the dozens of yelping, eager hounds. The goal is not just to procure meat, but to engage in a ritual that reinforces your martial prowess and your dominion over the land. The hunt is governed by a quirky and incredibly complex set of rules and traditions, including a specific language of horn calls. A certain sequence of notes on the hunting horn might signal that a stag has been spotted, another for a wild boar, another to call the dogs back, another to signal the kill. A true nobleman is expected to know this vocabulary by heart. The entire event is a loud, chaotic, and thrilling spectacle of horsemanship and organized pursuit. It is also incredibly dangerous. You are galloping at high speed over rough, wooded terrain. A fall from your horse could easily result in a broken neck. The true peril, however, comes when your quarry is cornered. The goal of hunting a wild boar is to kill it before it exercises its right to violently disagree with your chosen hobby. A cornered, wounded boar is a famously furious and powerful beast, capable of disemboweling a horse or goring a man's leg with its sharp tusks before it is finally brought down with spears. It is a thrilling, adrenaline-soaked pastime that frequently ends with a serious, if not fatal, injury for one of the hunters. Your other primary form of outdoor entertainment is the tournament. This is the ultimate expression of your knightly class. It is a grand spectacle where you can display your wealth through your magnificent armor and horse and your skill in the arts of war. The main event is the joust. Jousting is a delightful sport where you and a friend charge at each other with 10-foot poles at 30 miles per hour. The loser is the one who dies or is merely horribly maimed. Great fun. While lances were often blunted or designed to shatter, the sheer physics of two armored men on powerful war horses colliding at speed was devastating. Broken bones, severe concussions, and falls were common, and sometimes the accidents were fatal. As a mainstream historical fact, King Henry II of France was killed in 1559 when a splinter from his opponent's shattered lance pierced the visor of his helmet and penetrated his brain. This was not a rare freak accident, it was an accepted risk of the sport. What was the purpose of these violent pastimes? Were they really just for fun? Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of noble pastimes like hunting and jousting was genuine recreation and an outlet for competitive energy, or if they were fundamentally performative acts of military training designed to keep knights and lords in fighting shape, and to publicly reinforce the martial values of courage and strength that underpin their entire aristocratic identity. So what do you do for fun on a rainy day when you can't risk your life hunting or jousting? Your options become even more limited. You might play chess or backgammon, quiet, strategic board games that have been popular for centuries, or you might summon a minstrel or a troubadour to entertain your court. You would then be treated to a performance of a chanson de geste, a long epic poem recounting the heroic deeds of some legendary knight like Roland or King Arthur. For indoor fun, you can play chess, a quiet and thoughtful game, or you can listen to a minstrel sing a 78-verse song about a knight you've never heard of. The excitement is palpable. You sit in your great hall, a chessboard before you, the repetitive melody of the minstrel's lute droning on in the background. You realize that your leisure is as circumscribed as your work. You are locked into a cycle of the same few, acceptable, noble pastimes. There is no room for personal hobbies, for quiet, creative pursuits, for the simple, spontaneous joy of discovery. Your fun is a duty, another performance of your status, another ritual to be observed. And more often than not, it is a ritual that is either deadly dangerous or mind-numbingly dull. The minstrel's song finally ends, or your chess game reaches a tedious stalemate. The day of fun is over, and you are left once again with the realities of your existence. You might look around your great hall, at the soaring stone arches and the rich tapestries, and feel a flicker of pride in your wealth and power. But then you take a deep breath, and that pride is immediately extinguished by the smell. You are forced to confront a deeply unpleasant and often overlooked truth of your luxurious life. Despite all your riches, you still live in filth. You realize that even a magnificent castle smells terrible. Let's start with the floor beneath your feet. After a feast, the great hall floor is a disaster zone. You walk across the rushes that cover the stone, and they squelch and crunch under your boots. These rushes, meant to provide insulation, have become a repository for everything that was dropped during the meal. Gnawed on bones, scraps of meat, stale bread, and gallons of spilled ale and wine. Servants will sweep out the top layer, but the lower layers remain, slowly composting into a dense, fragrant mat of rotting garbage. You walk across the Great Hall floor. The rushes are a fascinating archaeological record of the last 6 months of meals, spills, and what the dogs have been up to. Then there is the smoke. Your castle has multiple, massive fireplaces. but chimneys are still a relatively inefficient technology. A significant amount of smoke from the cooking fires in the kitchen and the heating fires in the halls doesn't go up the flue. Instead, it billows out into the rooms, filling the upper reaches of the hall with a perpetual greasy haze. The stone walls and the tapestries are coated in a thin layer of soot, and the air you breathe always has a smoky, acrid taste. And the smells are not just from food and fire. Remember the hundreds of people and animals living within these walls. They all contribute to the castle's unique aroma. The stables and kennels are often part of the main castle complex, and the potent smell of horse and hound is a constant companion. Your own beloved hunting dogs are not kept outside. They roam freely through the halls, sleeping by the fire, their wet fur and casual droppings adding to the general miasma. The air in the castle has a certain je ne sais quoi. That je ne sais quoi is mostly smoke, unwashed night, and rotting garbage. But the biggest contributor to the stench is the complete and utter lack of sanitation. There is no running water, no sewer system. Your toilet, known as a garderobe, is a small room with a stone or wooden seat that opens directly onto a chute in the castle's outer wall. As a mainstream historical fact, this chute would empty into a cesspit at the base of the wall, or quite often directly into the castle moat. Your castle's beautiful shimmering moat also serves as the castle's primary toilet. It gives the carp a unique, robust flavor. The smell from this open sewer, especially on a warm day, would waft up and permeate the entire castle. How did you and your wealthy contemporaries cope with this constant olfactory assault? The primary method was to fight one smell with another. This is where the quirky but essential pomander comes in. You would carry a small ornate metal ball, often made of silver, filled with fragrant materials like cloves, nutmeg, ambergris, or musk. When the ambient stench became too overwhelming, you would simply lift this pomander to your nose and inhale deeply. Servants would also strew sweet-smelling herbs like lavender, chamomile, and meadowsweet across the floor, which, when crushed underfoot, would release their fragrance, temporarily masking the more offensive odors. These practices were a constant, fragrant admission of defeat in the war against stink. Did medieval people even notice? Were their noses simply accustomed to a level of filth we would find unbearable? Historians still argue whether medieval people had a higher tolerance for smells that we would find repulsive due to constant exposure, or if they were just as sensitive but simply resigned to a world where bad odors, like the cold and the dark, were an inescapable fact of life. You stand in the middle of your supposedly magnificent home, a fortress of power and a beacon of wealth, but you are surrounded by rotting food on the floor, greasy smoke in the air, animal waste in the corners, and the faint, unmistakable smell of the open sewer that is your moat. Your velvet robes may be beautiful, but they cannot block out the stench. Your wealth can build high stone walls, but it cannot provide a simple, clean, fresh-smelling room. This is another of the great, unglamorous truths of your privileged life. You are the lord of a magnificent, powerful, and very, very smelly garbage pile. The stench and squalor of your own castle have become so familiar they are almost unnoticeable. But soon, a summons arrives from the King's Court, or perhaps it is time for your annual progress to inspect your other far-flung manors. You must travel. And you are about to discover that while a peasant's journey is a lonely, vulnerable trek, your own travel as a rich lord is a different, but equally unpleasant, kind of nightmare. Getting anywhere is still a miserable, dangerous ordeal. You just have to do it with a lot more luggage. You do not simply pack a bag and ride off. Your departure is a massive logistical operation that takes weeks to prepare. Your status must travel with you. You decide to travel to your summer manor. Your light travel party consists of your family, 50 knights, 100 servants, and a train of wagons carrying everything but the castle walls themselves. You're not travelling, you're invading, but with more tapestries. The wagons are loaded with your clothes, your plate armor, your silver dishes, your tapestries to cover the walls of whatever cold hall you'll be staying in, and even your own magnificent bed, which is disassembled for the journey. You bring your own bed because you know for a fact that the beds at any inn are already fully occupied by legions of fleas and lice. This entire traveling circus, known as your entourage, moves at the speed of its slowest component. the heavy, ox-drawn wagon. You travel at the majestic pace of a tired ox, which gives you plenty of time to contemplate every single bump in the road on a personal, intimate level. The roads themselves are a disgrace. They are not paved highways. They are rutted, muddy dirt track. The road is a series of potholes connected by mud. It's less a road and more a suggestion of a direction one might go if one disliked their spine. After a heavy rain, these tracks become impassable swamps of thick, sticky mud where wagons can get stuck for days. River crossings are a particular challenge, as sturdy bridges are rare. Fording a river can be a dangerous business, with the risk of a wagon overturning and spilling its precious cargo and your wealth into the fast-moving current. Why endure this? Why move at all? As a mainstream historical fact, many medieval courts were peripatetic or itinerant. A great lord or king would constantly move his entire household from one castle or manor to another throughout the year. Historians still argue whether this peripatetic nature of medieval courts was primarily a logistical necessity, a way to literally eat up the stored food and resources of one estate before moving on to consume the resources of the next door. If it was a sophisticated political strategy designed to project the Lord's power, administer justice in person, and maintain direct contact with his subjects across a wide and disconnected territory. To manage this constant movement, you employ a quirky but essential servant known as a harbinger. This man rides ahead of your main party to the next town or village on your route. His job is to secure lodging and supplies for your entire massive entourage. This usually involves arriving at the local inn and informing the innkeeper that the Lord is coming, and will require every room, kicking out any existing guests into the street. The harbinger is essentially your professional bearer of bad news for every innkeeper in the kingdom. Even with these preparations, the journey is deeply uncomfortable. You might travel in a covered carriage, a luxury in itself, but it has no suspension, and every jolt of the road travels directly up your spine. You are still exposed to the weather, the biting wind, the freezing rain, the oppressive summer heat, and you are a very tempting target. While your 50 nights offer protection, a large, slow-moving baggage train filled with treasure is a magnet for organized and ambitious bandits who might see the potential reward as worth the risk of attacking an armed party. At night, you might stay at the castle of a lesser lord who is obligated to host you, imposing the same burden of hospitality on him that you so often bear yourself. Or you might take over an entire inn, but the inn is still a drafty, dirty public space. The food is unfamiliar and possibly unsafe. The water is questionable. You are surrounded by the same smells of unwashed humanity and livestock as you are in your own home, just with less familiar scenery. You sit in your carriage, stuck for the third time today in a patch of deep mud, listening to the curses of your wagon drivers and the miserable lowing of your oxen. You are surrounded by all the trappings of your wealth and power, a mobile city of servants and soldiers, yet you are profoundly miserable, uncomfortable, and making no progress whatsoever. You realize with a sigh that medieval travel sucks for everyone. Your immense wealth doesn't allow you to escape the ordeal. It just allows you to experience it on a grander, more cumbersome, and more expensive scale. Your miserable journey finally ends, and you arrive at the king's court, a glittering hub of power, intrigue, and yet another set of exhausting obligation. You are barely out of your travel-stained clothes before you are reminded of one of the most significant and inescapable burdens of your wealthy existence. It is not enough to be powerful, well-married, or brave in battle. You must also be seen to be holy. You are now forced to confront the heavy weight of performative piety, where your every action is scrutinized for its religious and social correctness. In your world, the church is not just a spiritual authority, it is an immense political and economic power. Bishops and abbots are great lords in their own right, and the Pope can humble emperors. Your personal faith is your own business, but your public piety is everybody's business. A reputation for impiety, or worse, heresy, can destroy you far more quickly than a rival's army. And so, your life is governed by a relentless schedule of religious performance. You are expected to attend Mass regularly, and this is not a quiet personal affair. You and your family have your own designated chantry chapel or a prominent pew at the front of the cathedral, where your every bow and prayer is visible to the entire congregation. You spend 3 hours at High Mass on Sunday, kneeling on a cold stone floor. It's less about spiritual enlightenment and more about showing everyone you're pious enough not to have your lands confiscated by the bishop. Your rivals are watching, the clergy are watching, and the common folk are watching, all judging the sincerity of your devotion. This performance of piety must also be backed up by immense financial contribution. As a mainstream historical fact, the great cathedrals and monasteries of Europe were built and maintained through the competitive patronage of the nobility. You are expected to donate vast sums for the construction of a new wing, to commission a magnificent stained glass window, which will, of course, prominently feature your family's coat of arms, or to endow a chantry chapel where a priest will be paid to say masses for your soul and the souls of your ancestors in perpetuity. Your path to heaven is paved with stone, glass, and gold, and the church is happy to send you the bill. Your piety also requires a display of public charity. You must be seen to be generous to the poor. This leads to highly ritualized and often awkward public ceremony. On a day like Maundy Thursday, you might be expected to participate in a ritual foot washing where you publicly wash the feet of 12 local paupers in imitation of Christ. Today is the annual Washing the Feet of the Poor ceremony. It's a beautiful expression of humility that is carefully choreographed and observed by everyone who matters to ensure they see how humble you are. To bolster your spiritual credentials, you become a collector of holy relics. This quirky but essential hobby for the medieval elite involves spending a fortune to acquire a supposed piece of a saint. The trade in relics is vast and almost entirely unregulated. You might pay a sum that could fund an army for what a travelling friar claims is a finger bone of John the Baptist or a vial containing the breath of Saint Joseph. You proudly own a splinter of the True Cross. You have 3, actually. They're all from different, very reputable monks. You try not to think about how they can't all be real. These relics are housed in ornate, gilded reliquaries in your private chapel, tangible proof of your holiness and a source of immense prestige. But is any of this real? Is your devotion genuine? Historians still argue whether the elaborate displays of piety by the medieval nobility were primarily motivated by sincere, personal faith and a genuine, terrifying fear of hell, or if they were sophisticated social and political strategies designed to legitimize their power and control a populace that took religion very, very seriously. The truth for you is likely a confusing mixture of both. You are a man of your age, and the fear of eternal damnation is as real to you as the cold stone of your castle walls. But you are also a political animal, and you are acutely aware that the bishop's favor is a shield. So, you play the part. You kneel when you are supposed to kneel, you give generously when the collection plate comes around, and you nod piously at the bishop's tedious sermon. You are performing. Always performing. Your spiritual life, like your marriage and your home, is not a private matter. It is a public institution, another source of stress, another crushing expense, and another arena where your rivals can watch you for any sign of weakness or insincerity. The weight of your soul and the weight of your public reputation are intertwined, and both are very, very heavy. You ride back from the King's Court, a feeling of cautious triumph in your heart. You have successfully navigated the treacherous political waters, defended your reputation against the slanders of your rivals, and perhaps even secured a new title or grant of land. You feel for a moment that you have mastered this deadly game. It is in this exact moment of perceived security that the end arrives, because the ultimate worst thing about being rich and powerful in medieval times is that your high status doesn't make you safe. It just makes you a more prominent, more tempting, and more satisfying target for murder. The end can come in many forms. It might be a swift, brutal assassination, a dagger in the ribs, as you walk through a shadowed cloister in your own castle, the assassin hired by the very baron you just outmaneuvered at court. It could come on the next battlefield, where a supposed ally accidentally fails to guard your flank, leaving you exposed and overwhelmed by the enemy. But perhaps the most terrifying end is not the one that comes from a blade in the dark, but from a proclamation in the light. One day, The King's Guard arrives at your gates. They are not here for your hospitality. They carry a warrant for your arrest on charges of high treason. Your rival has finally succeeded. He has poisoned the king's ear against you, perhaps producing forged letters authenticated with a stolen copy of your seal, or bribing one of your own servants to testify against you. All your life you've worried about poison, battles, and disease. It turns out the thing that gets you is a signed piece of parchment from the king. The paperwork is mightier than the sword, it seems. Your fall from grace is swift and absolute. Your allies melt away, terrified of being associated with a traitor. Your lands are seized by the crown. Your family is disgraced. You are thrown into a cold, dark prison cellar, place far colder and filthier than even your own drafty castle. You are subjected to a brief show trial, where the verdict was decided long before you entered the room. You are condemned to die. As a mainstream historical fact, the judicial murder of inconvenient or overly powerful nobles was a common tool for consolidating royal power in the late medieval period. Men who were, by any measure, among the most powerful people in the kingdom could be brought to the executioner's block by a simple shift in political favor. Your immense wealth and status are no protection. They are the very reason for your doom. A powerful king does not like to have subjects who are too powerful themselves. You are led to a scaffold erected in the public square. The same common folk who once bowed to you now jeer and throw refuse. You are granted one final, quirky privilege of your rank. You are to be beheaded with a sharp sword, the weapon of a nobleman, rather than the crude axe used for common criminals. It's a great honor. The end result is the same, but the craftsmanship is much finer. As you kneel, placing your head on the block, your entire life flashes before you. The cold, drafty castle you spent a fortune to maintain. The heavy, uncomfortable robes you wore to signal your importance. The rich, poisoned food you ate in constant fear. The loveless political marriage you endured. The brutal wars you fought. The endless, tedious disputes you settled. All the misery, the paranoia, and the discomfort you endured in the name of power and legacy, all of it, has led to the single ignominious moment. Your last thought is that your rival, Baron Fitzwalter, will probably get your favorite hunting dog. You hope they bite him, the sword falls. And in that final silent moment, the ultimate truth becomes clear. For all the things that sucked about being rich in the Middle Ages, the cold, the filth, the lack of privacy, the terrible medicine, the endless obligations, the very worst thing was the simple, brutal fact that your life was a precarious performance and a violent, premature end was always waiting in the wing. And with that final sharp conclusion, our journey into the uncomfortable lives of the medieval elite is over. The echoes of the great hall, the weight of the velvet robes, and the cold chill of the stone castle can now begin to fade, replaced by the quiet warmth and genuine comfort of your own bed. The constant, gnawing anxiety of political intrigue and the ever-present fear of betrayal can dissolve into the peaceful stillness of your room. Let go of the burdens that were never yours to carry the weight of titles, the strain of public performance, the paranoia of a life lived on a razor's edge. The story is told, and the figures within it can retreat back into the mists of history, their struggles a distant echo. You are here, now, in a place of true luxury, a place of privacy, safety, and peace. Allow the simple, profound comfort of your surroundings to be your focus. Feel the softness of your pillow, the gentle weight of your blanket. Listen to the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breathing. There are no rivals to watch for, no duties to perform. There is only this moment and the gentle, welcoming embrace of a deep and untroubled sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.